Hello everyone and welcome to the season finale of Speechless. I'm your host, Nina Palecchio, and today we'll be discussing the issues that matter. The teams competing tonight have proven themselves to be the best and brightest debaters of the bunch, but only one team will come out as the grand champion. Don't touch that remote. Ready, set, Speechless. First, we'll start with a discussion about Hollywood's obsession with remakes. Next, we have a debate on the death penalty in the case of the Boston Marathon bomber. Then, we'll wrap up the season with a look at mental illness and how it is portrayed in the news by media outlets. Tonight's two teams are the Trojans and the Spartans. This is the final competition to reveal who will be the Speechless Grand Champion, and it has been a long journey to arrive at this point. What can we expect from the Spartans tonight?
You know, we prepared really hard for this, and regardless of what happens, we're just excited to be here, Nina.
Yeah, I mean, a good chunk of my finals are over, so that bulk of stress is gone. I mean, this stress is obviously still there, but, you know, as bright as your blazer is, that's how bright our research is today.
Hey,
so
that's how we like our debaters to be nice, bright, and fresh. How are the Trojans feeling about the debates tonight?
We're feeling good. We're feeling pretty confident. We sort of like to just roll with it and do a lot of the preparation mentally instead of on paper.
Right.
But it's served us well so far, so we don't want to change a winning formula.
Yeah, we've actually never debated them before together, so it's all
So
new and
this
fresh.
is not only a live episode, this is a heated episode.
Yes.
Well, we've gotten to know the teams very well this season, but let's take a look at what they're like outside of the studio.
We are Sparta!
So my name is Stephanie Mashad. I am from Groton, Massachusetts, and I am a debater on the Spartans team with Sam Smith.
All right, my name is Sam Benson Smith. I am the partner of Stephanie Michon. We are on the Spartans for the Speechless Grand Finale.
I only eat shaped mac and cheese, preferably SpongeBob shaped, but I will take any shaped mac and cheese.
A fun fact myself is that I've known how to tie since I was 5, and I own 4 suits.
What really got me interested in debating is when Lindsay Lohan debated on Mean Girls in that math competition for her class.
I originally got into debate because in high school I heard that you could miss class and be able to dress up nice to be on the debate team. I went to Catholic school, so any opportunity to miss as many days of school as possible I took. And I slowly fell in love with debate, and here I am today debating in college, and I couldn't be happier.
If I'm debating on something that I don't necessarily agree with, I'm able to just put it behind me because I've just been doing that my entire life, being a journalism major.
My favorite debate this year was about dividing California into separate states. I thought it was a very interesting issue, and I think it's very pertinent to just modern society.
My favorite debate that we did this season was the one about Photoshop because I have a lot of strong opinions on Photoshop, and I was lucky enough to argue on the side that we shouldn't be using it because it is it's not helpful to girls in this day and age. So that was definitely my favorite debate. My pre-debate ritual is Sam and I say a prayer.
So we have a prayer to the debate gods, which gets us really in the mood.
Do some deep breathing exercises, and just go over our notes a little bit together.
My name is Michaela Hellman. I'm a freshman journalism major from Milton, Vermont. I'm on the Trojans debate team.
Connor McKay. I'm a sophomore here at Emerson College, and I'm from Rochester, New York, and I'm a proud member of the Trojans.
The thing that got me interested in debating is probably just being really interested in politics in general, which tends to come with a lot of debating, and also being someone who really likes to have my opinion known and someone who likes to, likes to kind of get in an argument with people about things and challenge my own beliefs about it.
I'm taking an argument and advocacy class this semester, and the teacher really inspired me to get into debating, and I love arguing with people and being passionate about issues that I care about, so it seems like a natural progression.
My pre-debate ritual, usually Connor and I, we just get there and get to the studio and we look over the arguments we both have and we see what we have in common and what we think our strong suits are going to be.
I like to go to La Familia Giorgio. It's a restaurant in the North End. I order a porterhouse steak and a large glass of milk. That usually produces good results.
We practice maybe some opening statements and go from there. So Connor came in probably like halfway through the season.
I was called from the bullpen.
Yeah, so I had a different partner originally, but we were truly meant to be together. So it worked out for the best, definitely.
There's a lot of natural chemistry.
Yes.
And she's got the facts. I've got the gusto.
Yes.
Bring it on, Trojans.
Spartans, you're going down.
Now that we know the debaters, let's get started with our first debate. With Michael Bay's remake of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Godzilla, and the sequel to the remake of Spider-Man coming out in the fall, we've been wondering, what is up with all the remakes? And more than that, what's up with all the remakes of the remakes? The Amazing Spider-Man came out just 10 years after 2002 Spider-Man, and Michael Bay's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles remake is coming out only 7 years after the animation. With all these advances in technology, it's great that we can improve these older movies, but some audiences complain that they've seen all of these movies before. The question up for debate tonight is, are these remakes warranted by technological advances, or has Hollywood simply run out of ideas? Let's start with you guys.
Well, to start, remakes should not be created as frequently as they currently are because they're shadows of the original film. They don't do the original film as much justice, and you can just look at a bulk of critiques of these films are much poorer than the original ones. On top of that, if they're trying to make it solely based on financial aims, a lot of times they aren't even successes. So if Hollywood is aiming to do this for a financial reason or an artistic reason, often they fail in both categories.
What do you have to say about that?
Well, I think that first and foremost, Hollywood is a business, and they realize that they have a market for these remakes, and that market is huge. And anything criticizing them is all opinion. Take The Amazing Spider-Man, for example. Came out, I want to say, almost 8 years after the original. It was a reboot. Made $262 million domestically, and total internationally made over $750 million. There's a market. Hollywood's just reflecting it.
Well, I mean, you look at specific instances like The Amazing Spider-Man, the remake with Andrew Garfield, right? That seems right. That was specifically one instance where it was a very successful film. But then you look at, say, the remake of Carrie, which was, I believe, last year. Off of a $30 million budget, it barely made, it ended up making about 34 mil in box office, so it barely made up what it put down. Same with RoboCop. They put tens of millions and a ridiculous amount of money into animation and into that project. It ended up critically being a failure. Same with Carrie. Both were critical failures.
But don't you
and then in addition to that, it was also a failure in the box office. I mean, if you look at an isolated incident like The Amazing Spider-Man, sure, it was successful. But on the whole, I mean, you look at the failure of Red Dawn, TMNT, like I said, RoboCop.
They're making another film, and Rotten Tomatoes said it only got 2 stars in the 2007 movie. So why go on and make a 4th one?
Why go on is because people are going to see the movie. They're a business just like anything else. If
But
they're not
hardly
making
anybody's
money,
going to see the movies. They
if
only
they're
got
not going
2.
to see them, they're going to stop making them. They're
Well,
not
I mean,
going
they're not
but
gonna stop
the thing
making
is,
them. They're making a
if they made
4th one.
TMNT, if they made Red Dawn, they made RoboCop, and I mean, all of these are different studios. We can't treat Hollywood like one single entity. I mean, each studios are going to make individual decisions based on whatever they see. But you look at each of these studios, different studios failing. Red Dawn got a 12% as the remake, and it didn't do well in the box office.
But those same studios have successes in the same regard. Otherwise, they wouldn't continue to make these other remakes. So just because there are some failures, what they're doing is trying to throw everything at the wall. And
Now-
whatever sticks, sticks. And they win big.
Kind of pushing it a little bit off necessarily the quality of the remakes and the viewership. Do you think that the technology, like the new technology that has been created, is warranting these
I think
new
the technology
remakes?
is taking away from the actual plot line because people are going to see these movies based off of the effects and the visuals, and it's taking away from the actual story. People don't even know what's going on in the story. They're just looking
I
at the
think
visuals.
new technology is great for films. Wouldn't you want to see like a 3D version of a classic film or something with updated?
Not
Yeah,
really,
but-
because
but-
classic is what
but-
makes it
but-
so
but-
great.
But then again, like animation can often take away from films. So say if like you have
That's
an,
a
you
matter
have
of
an amazing.
opinion. That's
That's your
subjective.
opinion.
Well, no, but the thing is, if you like, there are actual specific instances. For example, a remake based on a television show, The Last Airbender, ended up getting a 5% on Rotten Tomatoes. It had an incredible amount of money put into animation, and it was an enormous failure, not only in the box office, but all the fans hated it. I'm saying that
It was
in
a
instances.
misfire. It was one.
Yeah,
it was a
exactly.
misfire.
If
Yeah,
any
no, but if you
industry-
say just that's a misfire, RoboCop was a misfire,
Okay.
Carrie was a misfire.
You're
TMNT
using
is a
the same-
misfire.
okay,
TMNT
you're
is a
using these
misfire.
same 4 examples, but if an entire industry
pretty
was
big
unsuccessful, it
examples.
would
The
no longer
Departed.
exist.
But once again,
The
isolated
Departed won
incidents
Best Picture and is a remake of a Hong Kong
Okay, well,
film
same
called
to you.
The
That's
Criminal
one
Affairs.
Yeah, but also
example.
that's a
I
different
think
market.
give us.
If it was remade, say they took Seven Samurai from Japan and then they moved it to the U.S. market, it's a different market. So I wouldn't say remakes specifically in the
But
United
they
States.
did that, and it's called The Magnificent Seven, and it was a huge hit in the 60s.
Well, no, I'm saying, but say if you do take, well, in the 60s specifically, but I'm saying now in modern day, because we're talking about remakes based on technological advances,
Sure.
I'm saying that often the millions of dollars which are put into another example of a remake, Total Recall. That the original film was very financially successful. It was well reviewed. It was liked by the fans. Came back and millions of dollars were poured into that production specifically, and it barely made back what it spent on solely animation.
But it's a business. It happens. You're talking about trying to regulate a private industry. That's getting into a whole bunch of other things.
Well, we're not talking about regulation. I'm just saying, even if it's a financial decision, I mean, your isolated incident was Spider-Man, and then I used several isolated incidents where it has failed.
But what are you saying? Are you saying that Hollywood should not do any remakes? Is that what you're saying?
No. Basically, well, I mean, the argument is, should they continue to do remakes? And the
At
fact
all, ever?
no,
I mean,
no,
some,
but the frequency of how many they're doing based on technological
People are
advances.
going
Who's going to
to
pick
see
and
them, though.
choose? And you say not classics. Who's going to decide, yes, this is a classic, this is a good idea?
Well, you can just look at critical reviews of individual films.
Oh, critical reviews are subjective. If look, like a
Yeah, but
movie,
but the thing is, if you have an
Last
Oscar-winning film and then you have a terrible film, and then I happen to say, I love The Last Airbender, but I think that Pulp Fiction is terrible.
Well, isn't
then
that the company's prerogative?
Gotta cut you guys off. Good last points, though. All right, I really liked what you originally said about how remakes can be shadows of the original. A lot of the time, it doesn't really fulfill the expectations that the viewers have, especially when there's already a fan base for a movie. I really liked how you guys added, though, that there is a market for this business, obviously, if they're continuing to make these remakes. And that by not making them, it's almost trying to control a private business. These must be warranted if someone wants them. I did like that you brought up a lot of examples like Carrie and RoboCop that didn't meet their quota that they wanted to meet in the box offices. But I am going to leave the mystery of the winning points to the end of the show. So, they say there is nothing new under the sun. That's why Speechless airs at night. Stay tuned for more original programming. Welcome back, everybody. Let's get started with our second debate. The annual Boston Marathon happened this past Monday, April 21st, and it was very bittersweet. Last year, a tragedy occurred at the marathon when Tamerlan Tsarnaev and Johar Tsarnaev detonated 2 pressure cooker bombs, causing many casualties, including the death of 5 civilians. Tamerlan Tsarnaev was killed in the line of fire, while Johar Tsarnaev was detained and has remained so since the attacks. Preparing for these trials the last few months, Johar Tsarnaev knowingly faces the death penalty for his actions. However, despite the tragedy, many argue whether or not the death penalty is a suitable punishment. Some think it is more than fitting, given that Johar Tsarnaev has committed an act of terror. Others believe that the death penalty is unjust and that a life sentence in prison is much more better alternative. So, is the death penalty an appropriate consequence for an act of terrorism, or is it unjustifiable no matter the crime? Let's start with you guys.
Our argument is that it is not justifiable, and we have 2 main reasons for this. Number one, the fact is that killing these people that committed these crimes, no matter how much of that decision is based on emotion, how much we want them to suffer, killing them does not bring back the loved ones that were unfortunately lost in the events. And our second point is that it is more expensive, and we will back this up, it is more expensive to put people on death row than it is to sentence them to life in prison.
And what do you have to respond to that?
Okay, so our argument is that the death penalty should be implemented in cases which justify the punishment, specifically terrorism. It is allowed in 35 states. It is afforded by the Supreme Court in specific instances, and currently there are over 3,000 inmates on death row right now. So it's accepted for just, for murder, but in the specific instance, it's mass murder, and there's precedence for terrorists being put to death because of terrorism.
And going back to your fact where you said it doesn't bring back the lives of people lost, it gives justice to the people and the families who lost their loved one, seeing the person that killed them just die and
Justice or
Yeah,
retribution?
I want to really bring out your point where you say justice, because justice to me is making a very fair and calculated decision that removes emotion and removes, the statements of loved ones and
But
looks at
that's
the
your
facts.
opinion, though. That's not. You just
And
said
I'm
justice
asking
to
that we
you.
remove our emotional opinions from things because you're dealing with someone's life here. You know what I mean? And we can't afford, when we are dealing with the life of a person, whether they be guilty or not, to allow our emotions and our own personal feelings about it to cloud that judgment.
But you have to
you
think
can-
about the families involved.
No, but in addition to that,
also.
if you try and make the objective argument about it, the concept of retribution, ethically speaking, is supported in the death penalty. And a quote from BBC.com, specifically their ethics section, says, and I quote, "The measure of punishment in a given case must depend upon the atrocity of the crime, the conduct of the criminal, and the defenseless and unprotected state of the victim. Specifically, in instance of the Boston bombings, it was an attack on defenseless citizens who had no protection, so the punishment matches the crime. He killed 5 people, so it's justified that he has the death penalty."
You brought up the families, and I just want to speak on that for a minute. There was an article on CNN a few months ago in which one of the mothers of one of the victims of these attacks was interviewed. She was asked on her opinion about seeking the death penalty, and she said, "I would not wish that on anyone, to go through the pain that I had gone through."
But that's
So if
one
you're
person
advocating
out
for
of
this,
everybody
if
who
you're
was at the
advocating for
marathon.
this, then you are saying that you consider it morally justifiable to kill someone's child because he is someone's child. And if
But
you
that child killed other people's
And
child.
specifically, if
ultimately.
it's
It's not
allowed,
our
if it's allowed by the
prerogative, though.
government, I mean, if you look towards the instance of the death penalty of Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma
But
City
we're not
bombing.
arguing what's currently allowed.
No,
I mean,
no,
that's not
no.
the debate.
We're arguing. We can argue based on precedents. If the United States, if 35 states agree that the death penalty is okay,
Over
Massachusetts
if the
is
Supreme,
not one of those.
No,
That
but
doesn't
but
matter,
in
though. Over
addition to
half
that,
of the
It does
country
matter. That's where the
agrees.
crime was
But
committed.
over
No,
half
but it
of
can
the
be overturned.
country-
It's been
and we're
overturned in
talking
instances
specifically
in
Alright,
which it
one
has
at a
happened.
You guys are both talking really good, but
Yeah,
I
no.
also want to point out that he brought up the specific example of a family member, and we could have family members that say yes, absolutely kill them, yes, absolutely don't. The problem with that is that when you are a family member of someone who has been killed or someone who has had a very heinous crime committed against them, of course you want to see the absolute worst punishment done to this person who has harmed someone who loved you. But that's why you're not the judge, and that's why you're not on the jury.
Well, yeah, exactly. They aren't. But my argument is coming objectively, taking the emotions out of it specifically, based on the definition of retribution, based on the fact the Supreme Court allows for it. And a quote from law.cornell.edu is, "Congress or any state legislature may prescribe the death penalty, also known as capital punishment, for murder and other capital crimes."
Well, let's talk about money.
No, but
Yeah,
Congress, you guys were talking about the
I had a question actually for Connor. His original statement said it's more expensive to put someone on death row than in regular prison.
absolutely.
Do you have a statistic on that?
So according to the Commission on Fair Administration of Justice, who specifically focused on California, California has the highest population of people on death row currently. To keep each of those inmates on death row is an extra $90,000 per year per inmate.
Okay.
So if we're talking just pure, let's take emotion out of it. Let's talk facts. It is not an economically sound decision to keep the death penalty in
When
place.
someone is subjected to a death penalty, they go through an extensive appeals system,
They need
which
better
costs an
lawyers.
incredible amount of money. Whereas if you're sentenced to life, there's a lot less legal fees and a lot less that the taxpayer is having to pay for this person.
So if you're going to want to go ahead and take emotion out, like you said, then let's talk facts.
Well, but then again, if you're taking, if the argument based on ethics, based on what the Supreme Court is allowing, if my argument is correct, then what value can you put on a human life? On the 5 deaths that happened in the Boston bombing, at the countless injuries that happened in the Boston bombing, can you put a value on a human life?
If he is sentenced to
is
death,
that worse?
taxpayers will pay for his legal. They will have to
But
pay
is
for him to go through the court system.
each person who
Last
died
thought here.
is each person who died in the Boston bombing worth that additional $90,000?
All right.
Can you put a value on a human life?
Got to end it there. All right, so this is a very interesting debate. I really liked how you originally said over here that it is allowed already in 35 states. That's kind of obviously more than half of our country. So that means more than half of our country essentially supports this. I also liked that you brought up the quote from BBC that a measure of punishment should match the crime, and especially with this kind of crime where so many innocent lives were not only killed, but so many people were injured in this attack. It's definitely a question. Should the death penalty be the crime or be the punishment? What I like that you guys said over here was the fact, or the statistic that I brought up. I thought that was a really solid statistic, that it is actually more expensive to put a person on death row than it is to imprison them. $90,000 extra per year per inmate, that probably adds up, especially with the amount that we have on death row. But again, gotta save that point. If an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind, then no one would be able to watch Speechless. Talk about a cruel and unusual punishment. We'll be right back with our final debate. Welcome back to Speechless. And now for our final debate. These days, news sources like ABC, CNN, Fox, and NBC are considered the most reputable. From reading their posts online to watching the evening broadcasts, we are influenced and informed on a daily basis by these networks. However, critics are claiming that these sources are sensationalizing important information in order to increase viewership. In doing so, they are neglecting to accurately inform the public. One of the issues questioned for the accuracy in the media is the stigma of mental illness. Oftentimes, news sources are found addressing mental disorders as sad, secretive illnesses that lead to violence. Many argue that because news sources are so powerful, they could eradicate the misinformation surrounding mental health. However, others argue that this isn't the responsibility of the news sources to eradicate stigma, but rather just to deliver the news. So, should news sources be responsible for using their influence to destigmatize mental illness, or should they stick solely to their journalistic responsibilities? Let's start with you over here.
So news organizations and journalists have an obligation, just fundamentally, two of the first things that we learn in journalism class is that we have an obligation to the truth, and we have an obligation to report the truth to our audience, the American people. So if they are either portraying mental illness in a negative light or not giving the hard facts without bias, then they are failing their own obligation, they're failing to do their job correctly, and they're failing the American people.
Okay, that's some strong words. What do you have to say about that?
Well, you talk about if they're not reporting the facts correctly, and I think that's a very different debate than what we're talking about. We're talking about a stigma. We're not talking about people straight up lying on the air. And so I think that we need to, shy away from that. Our main point is that journalists will represent what society is currently reflecting. And if we need to change the stigma, that needs to start with society, not with the journalists.
It is not the purpose of news organizations to advocate for a cause. It is
or
the
to promote an agenda at all.
It is the purpose of these organizations
But
to
the
simply
words that they
report
put
the
on
news.
it's a bias. The words that they use, but like in the debate topic, sad, depressing, like.
Can you point to
undercover.
specific examples of that?
That was
Well,
specifically
it's in
in
the
the prompt that we
It's in the
received.
prompt.
It said both those
says
two
use
words were
those
used.
words.
And the thing is, even if they're reporting on the mental illness stories and they're talking about over 25% of Americans over 18 suffer from mental illness, sure they might be reporting the statistics about it, but if they're using negative spins like sad and depressing, then it's putting a negative spin on it, presenting to the American people. In addition to that, the American society is shaped by the media, especially in the expanding media world. So the daily news, social media, the New York Times, everything, they are providing us with everything, the stats about society. So journalists are obligated to provide the facts to society. That's how the opinions are formed, especially in a world where social media is so huge.
By presenting them the way that they present them, they are inspiring people to seek help and inspiring other people to help these people seek
By
help.
calling their problems sad and depressing.
Well, you also point to this, you're kind of painting this picture that people are sensationalizing these cases. Sure, I'm sure that there's a lot of sensationalization going on. However, the people who make it onto the news, who have mental illness, are on the news for a reason, generally because they probably did something kind of sensational. And so we can sit here and say, yes, absolutely, 1 in 4 people have a mental illness, and I'm not saying that they are all sad and depressed and schizophrenic, because that's like a term that we don't want to use. However, the people who make it onto the news stories and are on the nightly news, a lot of times those descriptions actually do fit. And
Yeah,
so
yeah,
they're
But
but you're
it's okay
saying
for
that-
a journalist to be biased.
And on
on
top of that,
a
you're
situation.
saying-
You
you're
use the
saying
word
that-
sad. Yes,
but-
it is.
no,
You
but-
use the word sad and depressing.
Yeah, but if you're saying that the people who get on the national news because of mental illness, that's a representation of 27% of Americans.
No,
I don't think
that's
I don't
exactly
thi-
what I'm not saying. I'm saying
Well,
that
but
those people are not the
then-
same as the rest of the people
Well, yeah,
who don't
then
get on the
they
news.
should be debating debating stories
So
which
we have-
accurately represent
So
27%
for me,
of
an
Americans.
example, you're going to pull someone off the street and be like, just so we don't want to clear up the stigma, here's a normal person.
No, because that's not
because
how
they're not
news
gonna make the news.
operates.
They don't
You
have
can do an editorial, you can do an op-ed, you can do an entire case on
The
diseases.
market's not there. I mean, journalists have to meet their market. No
It
one's
is
gonna,
ratings. They
Yeah.
have to get
Well,
ratings.
yeah,
to
But the
Well,
job
no,
of
but
a journalist
that-
isn't to be biased at all or to put spins on anything. It's up to you learn in journalism class, it's up to the audience to decide something.
So then
And
why
it's
are
not
you?
up to
So
the
then why are you
reporter.
advocating for them to fight for a cause?
Exactly. If it's up for the audience,
Well,
why should the
no,
journalist
we're
promote
not
something?
saying they should fight for a cause. We're saying they shouldn't be spinning these facts about mental illness by using these adjectives
words.
But
and
the-
these
but
ways
the
that are
prompt-
presenting.
no,
On
no,
top
no,
of that,
but
what
the
you guys
argument-
are saying,
You
you're
don't
saying
have
that
a
if they're doing it
solution,
for
though.
ratings, that's going against journalistic principles.
You don't have a solution though.
And the argument
The
was not
solution is
whether
to
or
The
not
just
solution
put
is,
those words on it, to
is
not
to
put that spin.
is to actually do their journalistic obligations
But
and
the
report
argument
the
is not
facts.
should we change our word choice is it the media's responsibility to destigmatize mental illness?
But the thing is, the media is creating the stigma in the first place.
No, the
yeah, they
stigma
are
is already
by
there.
using no, and
It's a
we're bringing it back to
society.
it again. We are the media is the source of the American people's
But you
views.
are not supposed to have an agenda.
It reflects the
The
society.
agenda is to report the facts. The agenda is to bring the American people the facts. And if they're spinning what the facts are, then that's changing the way the American people feel, and they're going against their own obligations.
Well, I want to point to the AP just released a guideline for dealing with people, for how teaching journalists, their reporters, how you should effectively address people with mental illness. And one of their guidelines that really struck me as troublesome was correcting offensive quotes from police officers and medical officials. And that's where I have the problem with putting your agenda in. If you are quoting somebody who used those terminology, and maybe some people are going to find them offensive, I'm not going to argue that with you. But your job is not to spin what's already out there.
Or
Wait, so are you talking about issues of
That's a little bit
censorship?
different,
You're talking about censoring quotes.
Well, it's not
Well, I mean, if they're
Well,
modifying a
that's
quote, then that's
completely
censorship. That's a completely different argument.
Yeah, that's
And on top of that, it's not an agenda if it is the fundamentals of journalism.
But you're telling people to change
Last
the
thought
word
here.
choice
The
that's out there.
news, not to say.
No, we're saying
Last
change the word
gotta
choice
cut
that
ya.
the anchors are using to
All right.
on these topics.
Well, this is clearly a very, very passionate debate. I am going to start with you guys. I really like how you say that journalists represent society. I think that is very true. The media, as we see with all these stations, Republican, Democrat, neutral, it reports the news, and that's what people watch, and that's what our society revolves around. What I like that you guys were saying is words like sad and depressing and words that have opinions are also what shapes our society. Like I said with them, the news shapes our society, so if the news is reporting these kind of things, then it's going to make the people watching the news feel these kind of things. I also like what you guys said about the fact that it is not the job of them to report an agenda, that's the word you used, to report an agenda. It's news for a reason, it's their job, and they're supposed to report things how they happen, and especially when a case takes place, you gotta report the facts. Well, not everything needs a sensationalized flair to it. Some shows like Speechless are naturally fascinating. Now stick around for the awards ceremony for the Speechless Grand Championship. 2 teams have entered the studio, but only one will leave with the prize. Don't miss a second of it because we'll be right back.
Presents Consumed is a show about food, but more so and more importantly, it's a show about people and the relationship that people have with their food.
We're going to dive deeply into issues such as eating disorders, food sustainability, and really examine how they define their relationships with food and how their relationships with food define them.
I'm a total foodie, so I think I eat to live.
I live to eat.
I eat to live.
I definitely live to eat.
Welcome back, everyone. Now, for my humble opinion. When it comes to Hollywood remaking movies, I do not think it should be done any further. However, I don't think these remakes are being made because filmmakers have run out of ideas. Instead, they're remaking these films because executives know these stories already have a popular audience. I think the film industry should focus on telling new stories and how technology can make these untold stories come to life, rather than merely remarketing the Titanic, but this time in 3D. I typically don't have a particular stance on the death penalty, but when it comes to acts of terror like the Boston bombing, this hits close to home. I believe the death penalty is a suitable punishment for the crime that Tsarnaev committed. As for mental illness in the media, I don't think it is the job of news sources to destigmatize these issues. I do agree that the wording that news sources use may add to the stigma, but as long as they are reporting what is happening, they are doing their jobs. It wouldn't hurt to add a little bit of sensitivity, though. Now for what you have all been waiting for. It is time to award the points for each debate. For the first debate, it was definitely a difficult one for me to decide, but the first point is going to go to the Trojans. I thought you did a very nice job in the first debate, and I thought you deserved the point. Second debate, it was a little bit even harder for me to decide because they just kept getting more heated, but I think you guys definitely got this point. I think the Spartans really hit the nail on the head with that argument. But what point really matters, it's this one. And the final award-winning Speechless Grand Champions, winners of the 2 $25 gift cards, are the Trojans. Loved your last debate.
Thank you.
Well, thank you guys, thank you. Thank you for watching the season finale of Speechless. Until next time, stay relevant, Emerson.